The motion to declare war on Earth had been on the floor for 9 minutes when they finally asked me to translate it into a human tongue, and I remember thinking that 9 minutes was a long time to wait before you bothered to tell the condemned what the sentence was. I sat at the low translator's bench below the speaking ring, where I had sat for 6 years, and I rendered the words exactly. I did not soften them. That was the whole of my profession, to carry meaning across the gap between species without bending it, and the meaning that day was hard and square and final. Speaker Vorhane of the Star League Assembly had read the resolution twice in his own clicking register, and now he wanted the human delegate to hear it cleanly so that no one could later say the verdict had been delivered in shadow. "Read it," Vorhane said, and the membranes along his throat flexed pale with the pleasure of it. So I read it. I told the man beside me that the Star League Assembly, in joint session of its 11-member fleets, had voted to declare a state of open war upon the homeworld and all holdings of the human species, effective immediately, and that the vote had carried by a margin so wide it had not been worth the counting. The man beside me was named Edrin Cole. He was Earth's permanent representative to the Assembly, a broad, gray, unhurried man somewhere past 60, with hands that he kept folded on the rail in front of him as though he were waiting for a train. He had not brought aids. He had not brought a counter-resolution, or a plea, or the long defensive brief that every delegation in my memory had brought to this chamber when the knives came out. He had brought himself in a flat black case the size of a ledger, and he had set the case on the floor by his foot when he sat down and not touched it since. He listened to me finish. He nodded once, the way a man nods when a clerk confirms an appointment he already knew he had. "Thank you," he said. "I understood most of it. But please tell the speaker I want to be sure of one thing." I told the speaker. Vorhane spread his upper limbs in the gesture the assembly used for magnanimity, which on his species looked like a man opening a coat to show he carried no blade. "Let the human ask. We are not barbarians. We give even the doomed their questions." The tiers above us rustled with the dry, papery sound of 900 delegates settling in to enjoy themselves. I had translated in that chamber long enough to know the sound of a room that believed it had already won. It was a sound like wind through a field that does not yet know there is a fire on the far side of it. Cole leaned a little toward me. His voice was low even, with no heat in it at all. "Ask him," he said, "whether the vote is final, or whether it can still be withdrawn," I asked. Vorhane laughed, the trilling, descending laugh his people made, and the tears laughed with him, 1,000 throats clicking down the scale. "Final," he said. "The vote cannot be withdrawn. The Assembly does not vote twice on the same dawn. It is done, human. Earth is at war with 11 fleets as of this moment, and no hand in this chamber will unmake it." I rendered that for Cole word for word. He nodded again. He looked, if anything, faintly relieved, the way you look when a doctor confirms the worst, so you can stop wondering. He reached down, unhurried, and lifted the black case onto the rail, and he laid his folded hands back on top of it without opening it. "Good," he said. "Then tell him I'd like to note the time." I did not understand the request, and for a moment I did not translate it, because a translator who passes a phrase he does not understand is a translator who will eventually pass a war. But Cole only waited, patient, his eyes on the speaker, and so I gave it to the chamber exactly as he'd said it. "He wishes," I told Vorhane, "to note the time." A ripple went through the lower tiers. Not alarm, not yet, only the small, confused stir of a room that had expected one kind of theater and been handed another. The delegate from the Kasuri block, 3 seats up, made the clicking question sound. The speaker's translator glyphs flickered across the great ring above the floor, rendering Cole's words into 40 registers at once, and in 40 registers they made no more sense than they had in mine. Vorhane's throat membranes paled again, this time with something closer to irritation. "Note the time," he repeated. Why would the condemned wish to note the time of his condemnation? Cole did not answer that. He drew back the lid of the black case, slowly with both thumbs, the way a man opens a watch he has carried a long time, and inside there was no weapon, no document of treaty, no bomb that the chamber's fear had half expected. There was a single instrument, a flat slate of dark glass with a face of small steady lights, and a chronometer running across the top of it in plain human figures that meant nothing to anyone in that room but me. He pressed one of the lights with his thumb. The chronometer began to run forward. "Local noon," he said quietly, not to Vorhane, not to me, but to the slate, as though he were speaking to someone a very long way off. "We'll have an answer by local noon." I should explain what the Star League was, because in the chamber that morning, every delegate in it believed it was eternal, and a man should know the size of the thing that made the mistake. The Star League Assembly was not a council of equals like the old federated bodies. It was a war bloc. 11 member fleets bound by a single charter whose first article was the right of collective force. Other governing bodies in the galaxy debated, deferred, formed commissions, lost decades to procedure. The Star League existed to vote on one thing, and to vote on it quickly, where the fleets would go next. In 400 standard years, it had declared war 31 times. It had lost none of them. The charter hung in carved relief above the speaking ring, and the 31 campaigns were named along its border in raised glyphs. Each one a world that had said no to the assembly and was no longer in a position to say anything at all. Earth had been seated as an observer 6 years before, the year I was hired, when humanity's first survey ships had blundered into League space, and the Assembly had decided it was cheaper to study the newcomers than to fight them blind. For 6 years, the observer's chair had been filled by quiet men like Cole, men who took notes, who asked little, who declined every invitation to boast of Earth's strength. The Assembly had read that silence, the way strong things always read the silence of the weak. It had read it as fear. I had read it differently, but no one asked the translator what he reads. "He is performing for us," said the delegate from the Threll fleet, rising on the second tier, her crest flat with contempt. "This is the human way. When the predator closes, the small animal makes itself strange, hoping strangeness will buy it a breath. Speaker, I move we proceed to the disposition of forces and let the human watch his clock alone." The motion drew approval clicks across half the chamber. Vorhain inclined his head toward Cole with the courtesy of a man who can afford it. "You hear the Assembly," he said. "We have voted. The fleets are already named. The Threll van, the Kasuri wings, the heavy elements of the first and fourth. They burn for Earth within the hour. Your clock is a curiosity, human, nothing more. Sit and watch it if it comforts you." I gave it to Cole. He listened. And he did a thing I had never once seen done in that chamber. He smiled, not wide, not warm. The small private smile of a man who has just been told the very thing he came to hear. "Tell the Speaker I'm grateful for the courtesy," he said. "And tell him the fleets won't burn for Earth within the hour." "They will not?" Vorhain's voice climbed. "They won't burn for Earth at all," Cole said. "But that isn't a thing I have to make him believe. He'll see it. That's why I noted the time." The chamber did not panic at that. I want to be honest about the shape of the thing, because it did not happen the way the old war stories tell it, all at once, a room breaking like glass. It happened slowly, the way a great structure fails. First a single beam, then the load shifting, then the long groan before anything visible moves. The first beam went when the Threll delegate, still standing, touched the comm stud at her collar to relay the disposition order to her van, and frowned and touched it again. I watched her do it a third time. I have replayed that small gesture in my mind more often than I have replayed anything else from that day. A proud creature, crest flat, jabbing at a stud that should have carried her voice to her warships and was carrying it nowhere. "Speaker," she said, and her voice had lost a half step of its certainty. "My relay is dark." Vorhain made the dismissive gesture. "Then use the chamber relay. The hour is moving." She turned to the chamber relay, the great trunk channel that bound the Assembly to every fleet in League space, the spine of 400 years of conquest, and she spoke the disposition order into it, formal and clear, and the order went out, and nothing came back. Not a confirmation, not a refusal, not the wash of static that means a channel is open and empty. Nothing. The particular nothing of a line that has been not jammed but closed, sealed at the far end by a hand the Assembly did not know was on it. Cole had not looked up from his slate. 11 minutes, he said to no one, and pressed the light again. "I want to set down, while the order of it is still exact in my memory, the way the first hour unspooled, because the histories that have been written since make it sound like a single blow, and it was not. It was 100 small refusals, each one arriving while the chamber was still recovering from the last, and the genius of it, I have come to use that word without flinching, was that no single refusal was large enough to break the Assembly's confidence, so the Assembly kept its confidence right up until it had nothing left to be confident about. The Threll commander's dark relay had been the first. The second came from the Kasuri benches, where the delegate's aide had been trying for some minutes to raise the Kasuri shipyards over Kess to confirm the wing's burn order, and had gotten through, and had then gone very still over his board. "The yards confirm the order," he said slowly. "They confirm receipt of the disposition, and they report that they cannot execute it." "Cannot," the Kasuri delegate repeated. "The drive corps will not arm. The yards say the corps report a lean." The aide looked up, and I remember the particular bewilderment on his face, the look of a man reading a word in a familiar document that has never been in that document before. "A maintenance lien, filed against the corps. The yards cannot arm a drive that is under lien by their own charter, and the lien speaker, the lien is 6 years old. It has been on the corps for 6 years. No one ever tried to arm them in anger before, so no one ever found it. The chamber did not understand that, and neither fully did I. But Cole understood it. I saw him hear me render it, and I saw the smallest tightening at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the expression of a man hearing that a thing he set in motion long ago had arrived on schedule. What's a maintenance lien? I asked him. Low? Off the record, the only personal question I asked him all day. It's paperwork, he said. Earth sold the League a service contract in our second year here. Drive core diagnostics. Very dull, very cheap. They were glad to be rid of the work. He folded his hands again. A contract that lets you inspect a drive core lets you flag a drive core. They signed it 11 fleets wide because it saved them a few technicians. Tell the Kasuri the lien is valid. It's their own signature. I did not tell the Kasuri that. It was not mine to tell, and I think some mercy in me did not want to be the one. But the aide found it himself a moment later, the old signature at the foot of the old contract, and he read it into the chamber relay, and the Kasuri delegate sat down without being told to. By then the chamber had begun to fracture, in a way that had nothing to do with Earth, and everything to do with what the Star League had always been underneath its charter. 11 member fleets bound by a single article, but 11 fleets are 11 owners, 11 prides, 11 sets of admirals who had spent 400 years jostling for honor inside the bloc, even as they conquered outside it. While the relays died one by one, the old rivalries surfaced like rocks at low tide. This is a Threll failure, said the delegate from the Asen fleet, rising. The Threll van had operational command of the relay trunk this cycle. If the trunk is dark, it is dark because the Threll let a human service the relay nodes that the Threll were too proud to service themselves. The Asen signed the same diagnostics contract, the Threll commander snapped. Read your own ledger before you read mine. I move to suspend the disposition, said a third voice, the Pell delegate, thin and quick. Until the source of the failures is found, the fleets should hold. We are sending burn orders into systems we cannot see. We could be ordering our own ships into a trap. The fleets cannot hold, Vorhain said. The fleets cannot hear us. That is the entire matter. There is nothing to suspend because there is nothing answering. That landed harder than anything, Cole had said, because it came from the speaker, and because it was simply true, and a true thing said by your own leader in a hard, flat voice will break a room faster than any threat from an enemy. The Pell delegate sat. The Asen delegate did not. He stood with his limbs spread in the accusation posture, glaring across the floor at the Threll, and I understood that the assembly had begun under the pressure to look for someone in the room to blame, because the someone outside the room was unbearable. Cole watched the Asen and the Threll snarl at each other across the speaking ring, and he leaned toward me. How long have these two hated each other? He asked. 200 years, I said. The Asen and the Threll fought on the same side at the campaign they call the Binding, and each has claimed the victory ever since. He nodded slowly, filing it the way he filed everything. They'll tear at each other now, he said. It's what proud things do when the floor goes out. From under them, they look for the nearest neck. He said it without contempt, almost gently, a diagnosis rather than a judgment. Note it for whoever asks you later. Earth didn't divide this assembly. We just stopped holding it together. It was never one thing. It only looked like one thing from underneath. I have been asked, more times than I can count, how it was done. How a species seated 6 years as a silent observer came to hold the relay trunk, the courier net, the legacy beacons, the drive core leans, the command key, the chamber armory, and the planetary grid. The whole nervous system of a 400-year block without a single alarm sounding in all that time. The questioners always want a weapon. They want a device, a virus, a master key, some single cunning instrument that explains it. There was no such thing. There was only the most patient theft I have ever heard of, and it was a theft the Star League paid for itself, line by line, glad of the savings. I knew pieces of it from my bench, because a translator hears the dull traffic no one thinks worth hiding. I knew that in Earth's first year, the human delegation had quietly offered to take over the maintenance contracts that the League's member fleets found tedious. Relay node servicing, beacon calibration, the drudge work of keeping a 400-year infrastructure running. The fleets had been delighted. Maintenance is beneath a warrior people. Let the newcomers crawl through the conduits. And so for 6 years, human technicians had crawled through the conduits of the Star League, servicing the nodes, calibrating the beacons, filing the liens, learning the spine of the block one bolt at a time because the block had decided that the spine was beneath its notice and had handed the keeping of it to the only ones who thought it was the whole game. That was the theft, not a device, a work order. 6 years of dull, cheap, gratefully outsourced labor, and at the end of it the people who did the work knew the body better than the people who owned it, and a body you know better than its owner is a body you can take whenever you decide the time has come. The League had measured Earth's strength by its fleets and found it small, and never thought to measure Earth's patience, because patience does not show up on a fleet inventory. You let us do your maintenance, I said to Cole. somewhere in the long middle of that morning when I had finally understood it. All of it. For 6 years. We asked to do it, he said. There's a difference. We asked very politely, and we did it very well, and we never once complained about how dull it was. Dull work is the only work nobody watches. He turned the slate over in his hands. Your speaker thinks Earth won this morning with the thing in this case. Earth won this morning with 6 years of invoices. The case is just so he'd have something to look at while he understood it. People need something to look at. A dead relay is not, by itself, a catastrophe. The assembly had 100 fallbacks, and Vorhane knew them all. He gave the orders crisply, and the deputy speakers moved to their stations along the ring, and for a few minutes the chamber had the brisk, almost cheerful energy of a body doing the thing it was built to do. They were not afraid. They were annoyed. A relay had failed at an inconvenient moment, as machinery does, and they would route around it, and the campaign would proceed, and the human's clock would be revealed as the bluff of a desperate man. I translated the orders as they came, because that was my function, and because no one had told me to stop, and so I had the strange vantage of a man standing at the center of a thing that does not yet know what it is. The deputy speaker for fleet liaison opened the secondary trunk. Closed. He opened the courier net, the old laser relay chain that predated the trunk and could not be reached from outside a hull. 3 nodes answered. The 4th did not. The 5th did not. The courier net ran node to node, each one passing the signal to the next, and somewhere out past the 5th node the chain simply ended the way a road ends at the edge of a flood. Speaker, the deputy said, and now there was a thread in his voice that had not been there. The forward nodes are not relaying. They are not dead. They are passing traffic the other way. Inbound. Heavy inbound. Vorhane went still. Among his people, stillness was not calm. It was the opposite of calm. The freeze of a creature that has caught a scent it cannot place. Inbound from where? I cannot resolve the origin. The headers are malformed. Or the deputy bent over his board. Or they are not malformed. They are in a format the net does not have a key for. I did not translate that for Cole. He had not asked, and besides, he was watching the deputy's face, and a man like Cole did not need the words. He understood the shape of a board that has stopped answering its master. I had seen, in 6 years, a great many delegations come into that chamber with strength they wanted the assembly to fear. They laid it out, the tonnage, the yields, the orders of battle, because they thought the fear of force would buy them safety. The assembly had crushed every one of them, because a strength you display is a strength your enemy can measure. And a thing that can be measured can be beaten by something larger, and the Star League was always larger. Earth had never displayed anything. 6 years of silence, and the assembly had filed that silence under fear and built a campaign on the filing speaker. The Kasuri delegate this time, on his feet, his 4 eyes fixed on the great status ring above the floor. The First Fleet has gone silent. Reading, Vorhane said. It is a routing fault. The First Fleet does not route through the failed nodes, the Kasuri said. The First Fleet anchors over Kess. It is 19 light minutes from any node in this fault, and it has gone silent. Now the chamber moved, not the break, not yet. But the first real shift of the load, 900 delegates turning at once toward the status ring, where the standing fleets of the Star League were shown as 11 steady points of light arranged in the old battle honor formation the assembly had, used for 4 centuries. As we watched, the point that was the First Fleet flickered, held, and changed from the steady white of a fleet under command to the slow amber pulse of a fleet that had stopped answering the roll. Then the 4th pulsed amber, then the Threll van which an hour ago was to have burned for Earth. Cole pressed the light on his slate. 7 minutes, he said. The deputy speaker for fleet liaison was a steady old officer named Drayle. And of everyone in that chamber, he was the one who behaved the way I would want a man to behave, with the floor going out from under him. He did not accuse. He did not despair. He worked the boards, one channel after another, and he reported what he found in a level voice, and it was his level voice narrating the death of an empire that gave the next minutes their terrible procession. Courier's net, Drayle said. Nodes 1 through 4 holding. Node 5 inbound traffic, format unresolved. Nodes 6 through 11, no response. A pause. Reverting to the legacy beacon chain. He keyed the legacy beacons, the oldest system the League had, blind pulse relays that simply screamed a signal into the dark and trusted some hull to hear it. They could not be turned because there was nothing in them to turn. They were brute and stupid and 400 years old, and for that reason, they were the one thing the chamber still trusted. The legacy beacons answered. The chamber leaned in. And what came back over the legacy beacons was not League traffic. It was a single repeating message, broadcast on the blind chain that the League had trusted precisely because it could not be subverted, and the message was in League ceremonial cadence, and it was addressed to the assembly by name, and it said only that the fleets of the Star League were directed to acknowledge a change of standing orders and to hold station pending the resolution of the human matter, and it was signed with the seal glyph of the Star League's own Central Command Authority. "That is our seal," Drail said. He said it very quietly. "That is the Central Command seal. That is not a forgery. The challenge response is correct. It is signed with the live key." "Then Central Command is sending it," the Osan delegate said. "Central Command is countermanding the disposition." "Why would Central Command? Central Command is 200 officers in a sealed bunker beneath this chamber," Drail said. "And Central Command has not answered the throne line in 19 minutes. He turned from his board, and he looked at the speaker, and then, for the first time, he looked down at the human at the rail. "Someone is signing with our key. Someone who has had our key long enough that the systems do not question it. The fleets are obeying because the fleets cannot tell the difference between us and whoever this is. And neither," his voice did not rise, "can we." I did not have to translate that for Cole. He had been watching Dreel's hands. When the deputy finished, Cole spoke, and for once he spoke to the whole chamber and not through me to the speaker, slowly, so my glyphs could keep pace. "The officer is the only one in this room telling you the truth," Cole said. I'd listened to him. "You've been signing your orders with a key for 400 years and never once changed it because you never once had a reason to think anyone was patient enough to copy it. We were patient enough. That's all. That's the whole secret. We were willing to wait 6 years to be a thing you'd already stopped checking for. There was a delegate I have not yet named who matters to this account because she was the only one in the chamber who tried, in that first hour, to do the human thing, to step back and ask not how to win but what was true. Her name was Senna, and she sat for the Avian, the smallest of the 11 fleets, a member by old treaty more than by strength, and she had never in 6 years risen to speak. She rose now. "Speaker," she said, "I withdraw the Avian fleet from the disposition." The chamber turned on her with the unified outrage of a body finding an easier target than the one outside the doors. "You cannot withdraw," Vorhain said. "The vote is taken. The charter binds all 11. "The charter binds 11 fleets that exist to fight," Senna said. "I am looking at the status ring, Speaker. I count 10 fleets that have stood down without a shot and one that is dark. There are not 11 fleets to bind. There is a chamber full of delegates and no fleets at all. I will not order the Avian to burn for a war the Avian cannot reach in ships the Avian no longer command. I withdraw." It was the most courageous thing said in that room all day, and the chamber hated her for it because she had named the dead thing aloud while everyone else was still pretending it might live. The Thrall commander called her a coward. The Osan called for a censure. Vorhain ruled the withdrawal out of order, and Senna, small, quiet Senna of the smallest fleet, simply sat back down having said her one true sentence and did not speak again, and I thought she was the only delegate in the chamber who would sleep that night. Cole watched the whole of it. When the noise of the censure motion had risen and broken and fallen away, he said to me low, "What's her fleet?" "The Avian, the smallest. They're a fishing people, mostly. They joined the League because the League would have taken their worlds otherwise, and a small fleet inside the bloc is safer than a small fleet outside it." "She's the one to keep alive," Cole said. "Not a threat, a note. The kind a man makes when he is already thinking past the hour he is in to the long cold work of what comes after a war that ends by noon. When the histories are written, she's the one who was right in the room while everyone else was right afterward. Mark her name in your record. People will need it. There's one exchange from the height of it that I have never reported in full, because it was not mine to report, but enough years have passed now that I think the record deserves it. The delegate from the Kasuri, the one whose drive cores had been frozen by 6-year-old Lean, did not sit quietly after his shipyards failed him. He was a sharp creature, sharper than most in that chamber, and once the first shock had passed, he turned his sharpness on the only puzzle left worth solving. Not how to win, which he had given up, but how completely he had lost. He worked his board through 3 more surrenders, saying nothing, and then he rose and he addressed Cole directly. And his voice had the flat curiosity of a scientist who has stopped caring whether he survives the experiment and only wants to understand its result. "I have a question," the Kasuri said, "and I would like a true answer, because I think you are the only creature in this chamber capable of giving me one. When did Earth decide to do this? Not when did you finish it. When did you decide? Was it this season, when our scouts pressed your borders? Was it last year, when the bloc first debated the human question, or was it?" And here something crossed his 4 eyes that I can only call dread. "Was it the day we seated you? Was it the very day we gave you the observer's chair?" I translated it. Cole considered the Kasuri for a long moment, and I understood that he was deciding whether to give the creature the mercy of a lie. He chose the truth, and I think he chose it because the Kasuri had earned it by asking it cleanly. You decided it, Cole said. Not us. You decided it but the day you sent armed surface ships to space and filed us as an asset class. We read the survey. We read what you'd written about us, the tonnage estimates, the resource projections, the line at the bottom recommending we be studied now and absorbed later. We didn't decide to do this. We decided to be ready for the morning you'd do it to us, 6 years ago, the day after we read your own report on what you intended. The Kasuri was silent. Then he did a thing that no other delegate did all morning. He inclined his upper body toward the human, the full formal bow of his people, the one reserved for an opponent who has beaten you fairly and whom you will not insult by pretending otherwise. Then we wrote our own sentence, he said, and handed it to the only people patient enough to read it. He straightened. I withdraw the Kasuri from the disposition, Speaker, and I will not be ruled out of order, because there is no order left to rule me out of. And he sat and folded his limbs and became the second delegate that morning to choose dignity over the dead pretense of command. It is worth recording what the chamber tried in the way of proof, because the assembly was not a stupid body, and a stupid body's defeat teaches nothing. The Star League had survived 400 years partly by refusing to believe its own panic, by demanding evidence before it acted, and even as the floor went out from under it, the chamber kept reaching by old reflex for verification, and the genius of what Earth had done was that every reflex toward proof only deepened the trap. Drayle ran the integrity checks first, the diagnostics the bloc used to confirm that its own systems were its own. The checks came back clean. Every relay, every node, every emplacement reported itself healthy, loyal, under proper command, because from the system's own point of view, they were under proper command. They had been answering the human hand so long that the human hand was, to them, the proper command. The integrity checks were not lying. The integrity checks had simply been taught, 6 years and one invoice at a time, that the right answer to who commands you was a hand the assembly did not know it had hired. The diagnostics say nothing is wrong, Drayle reported, and the despair in it was the despair of an honest officer watching his instruments betray him by working perfectly. I cannot find the breach, Speaker, because by every measure my instruments are built to take, there is no breach. The systems are not compromised. The systems have been re-owned. There is a difference, and we have no test for it, because in 400 years it never occurred to us to test for it. A delegate from the Pell, quick, careful, demanded the manual confirmation, the physical fallback. Send runners, in the flesh, to the central command bunker beneath the chamber, and have living officers report whether they still held their own boards. It was the right instinct. It was the instinct of a body that has learned not to trust its instruments. Vorhane ordered it, and 2 wardens went down through the floor of the chamber to the bunker, and the chamber waited in a silence so complete I could hear Cole's chronometer ticking 3 meters away. The wardens came back. They reported that the bunker was sealed, not breached, sealed from the inside by its own blast protocols, which had engaged 40 minutes earlier in response to an emergency lockdown order, signed with the Central Command key, instructing the 200 officers of Central Command to secure themselves within and await the resolution of an external threat. The officers were alive. The officers were safe. The officers were locked by their own systems behind a door they had been ordered to seal by the very authority they served, and that authority was the hand at the rail. They are not even prisoners, Drayle said slowly, understanding at last and worst. We did not capture Central Command. Central Command locked itself away to protect itself, on an order it trusts, and it will not come out until the order it trusts tells it the threat is past. The human does not have to hold our command staff. He convinced our command staff to hold themselves. He set down his stylus. There is nothing to retake, Speaker. There is no door to force. The whole bloc has been persuaded, by its own keys and its own protocols, that the safest thing it can do is exactly what the human needs it to do. I do not know how to fight that. I do not think the word fight applies. Cole listened to me render it. It doesn't, he agreed mildly. Fighting was your idea. Tell the deputy I said he's the best officer in this chamber, and that's not a consolation, it's a fact. And he should remember it was true on the morning his bloc found out it had already lost. Bodies that survive remember who told them the truth. He'll be useful after. The honest ones always are. I have been asked since whether I tried to warn them, whether I, sitting at the heart of it, understood what was happening before they did and held my tongue. The honest answer is that I understood it the way you understand a tide, not the moment it turns, but a slow certainty rising under the noise, until you realize the water that was at your ankles is now at your knees and you cannot remember it moving. What I understood was this. Earth had not been silent because it was afraid. Earth had been silent because it had been counting. 6 years of an observer's chair was 6 years of sitting in the spine of the Star League and learning where every nerve ran. Cole's predecessors had taken notes, They had asked little, they had declined to boast, and all the while, somewhere out in the dark beyond the failed nodes, the answer to those notes had been assembling, patient and unseen, in a place the assembly had never thought to look, because the assembly had never imagined it needed to. Reach the fourth on the secure throne line, Vorheim ordered. The throne line was the speaker's own channel, the one that could not be intercepted, the one the charter reserved for the gravest hour. He had never in my 6 years had cause to use it. The deputy keyed it. The chamber held its breath, 900 creatures, and the only sound the small steady ticking of a human chronometer that no one but Cole and I could read. The throne line answered. For one instant the chamber sagged with relief, an audible exhalation across the tiers. A voice came through, and it was a League voice, the clipped formal cadence of a fleet flag officer reporting to the assembly. The deputy's crest lifted. Vorheim leaned toward the speaker grill. Then I heard the words, and I understood the words before the chamber did, because translating is hearing a half second ahead of everyone else, and the half second I had was the worst half second of my life. The flag officer of the Fourth Fleet was not reporting. He was surrendering. He was reading, in the formal cadence, the terms under which his fleet had stood down. Not been destroyed, not been boarded, stood down, because at some hour in the dark, while the assembly debated a resolution it thought was the beginning of a war, every command node of the Fourth Fleet had simply ceased to answer its own admirals and begun to answer someone else. No shots, no boarding. The fleet had not been taken. It had been turned, the way you turn a key, by a hand that had been resting on the lock for longer than anyone knew. I rendered it for the chamber because that was my function. I kept my voice flat. I told 900 delegates of the undefeated Star League that the Fourth Fleet had surrendered without a shot, and I watched the words land, and I will not pretend it gave me no satisfaction, because it did, a cold and bottomless satisfaction I am not proud of and would not trade. The chamber broke then, not into screaming, into a rising drone, the sound of hundreds of voices all asking the same question at once, and none of them getting an answer. Delegates were on their feet. The Thrall commander was shouting into a dead relay. The status ring above us showed amber now from edge to edge, 11 points of light, 10 of them pulsing the slow surrender amber, and the 11th, the heavy second, gone wholly dark. Through all of it, Cole sat with his folded hands on the rail and his slate ticking, and he had not raised his voice once, and that, more than the amber lights, more than the deadlines, was the thing the chamber could not bear. A man who is winning a war does not need to raise his voice. The surrenders came in then, one fleet at a time, and the form of them was the worst part. Not destruction, which a warrior body can mourn and avenge, but the quiet bureaucratic stand-down of fleets that had simply found themselves answering a new hand and decided, ship by ship, captain by captain, that the new hand held all the cards. The throne line, once it was working again, and it worked because someone wanted it to work, because someone wanted the assembly to hear this, carried the flag officers in sequence, reading their terms in the formal cadence. The Thrall van stood down, terms accepted, no casualties. The Kasuri wings, drives under lean, unable to arm, terms accepted under protest. The First Fleet over Kess. Command nodes turned, the Admiral relieved by his own systems, terms accepted. The Deputy Speaker Drail read each one into the chamber as it came, and his level voice never broke, and that was somehow harder to bear than if it had. After the fourth surrender, the Thrall commander stopped accusing the Asan and went very quiet, and I watched her do a thing I have thought about many times. She took the comm stud from her collar, the dead relay, the one that had carried her voice to her van for 30 years, and she set it on the bench in front of her, carefully, the way you set down a tool you will not need again. She did not throw it. She did not crush it. She simply set it down and folded her limbs and became, in the space of that gesture, a delegate without a fleet, which in the Star League was a delegate without a self. Cole saw her do it. He did not look away, and he did not gloat, and when she happened to look up and find the human watching her, he gave her a single small nod, not triumph, not pity, the acknowledgement one professional gives another at the end of a contest that one of them was always going to lose. The Thrall commander held his eyes a moment. Then she looked back down at the stud on the bench, and that was the last she spoke in the assembly of the Star League. You could let them keep something, I said to Cole quietly, off the record again, surprising myself. Some of them, the small fleets, the ones who voted because the charter made them. He considered it. He did not dismiss it. That's not my call to make in this chair, he said. I came to note the time. What Earth does with 11 surrendered fleets is a question for people with more authority than a permanent representative, and they'll be along by tomorrow. Then he looked at me, really looked. The first time he had done so, and something in his face was tired in a way I had not seen, but I'll tell you what I think. I think the ones who voted because the charter made them should be told the charter is dead, and offered a door. The ones who voted because they wanted Earth gone should be told the same thing in a colder room. The difference between those two rooms is the only thing that separates us from what they were going to do to my world this morning. If we forget the difference, we didn't win anything. We just became the next thing the galaxy is afraid of. And someone in 6 years will sit where I'm sitting and note the time on us. There was, in the middle of the surrenders, one genuine attempt at force, and I record it because it is the only moment in that long morning when the chamber stopped being a chamber and became, for 90 seconds, a battle, and because the way it ended told the assembly more than all the dead relays put together. The Asen delegate, who had spent the hour looking for a neck to take, found at last the only target left in reach, the human. He did not say so. He simply gestured to the 2 armed wardens who flanked the great doors. Ceremonial guards, the assembly's own, who had stood at those doors for 400 years and never once drawn the long energy lances they carried as symbols of the chamber's authority. The Asen gestured, and the warden started down the aisle toward the rail where Cole sat. I did not warn him. I am ashamed of that, and I will not pretend otherwise. I froze, the way a man freezes when the thing he has been watching from a safe distance turns and walks toward someone beside him. But Cole had seen the gesture. He always saw the gesture. He did not rise, and he did not reach for the case, and he did not so much as turn his head. He simply spoke one word into his slate in plain low human speech, and the word was not a command I understood. The 2 wardens stopped halfway down the aisle. Their lances, which had been live and humming, went dark in their hands at the same instant, both of them, with a small descending whine. The wardens looked at the dead lances. They looked at each other. One of them tried the activation rune twice and got nothing. The warden's lances draw from the chamber armory grid. Cole said to the Asen, through me, still without turning. The same grid that feeds the lights and the relays and the seal reader on the speaker bench. You've been standing in a room I've been able to switch off for some time. I left the lights on because I'm not a barbarian either. A pause. Sit your wardens down. The next thing I turn off is the air handlers, and I'd rather not. Tell the Asen that's not a threat. It's a courtesy. A threat is a thing you say when you might not be able to do it. The Asen delegate sat. The wardens, after a moment, walked their dead lances back to the doors and stood at them again, 2 ceremonial guards holding 2 dark sticks, and the symbol of the chamber's authority became, in front of 900 witnesses, exactly that, a symbol, and nothing under it. I have seen many demonstrations of power. I have never seen one quieter or one that left less to argue with. Not every delegate met the hour with dignity. I would be lying to the record if I painted 900 creatures all coming gracefully to the same. Understanding. Most of them did not understand at all. Not really, not in the time we had. Most of them only felt the floor go and grabbed at whatever was nearest, and some of what they grabbed at was ugly. A block of the heavy benches, the old conqueror fleets, the ones with the most names on the wall, tried, in the chaos, to constitute themselves as an emergency command and adjourn the assembly out from under Vorhane, on the theory that if the block's own structures had been turned against it, the answer was a new structure the human had not yet had time to learn. It was not a foolish idea. It was simply 6 years too late. They gathered at the heavy benches, a dozen of them, and began to draft an emergency charter on a sideboard. And for a few minutes there were effectively 2 assemblies in the chamber, Vorhane's dying one at the ring and the conspirators' stillborn one in the corner. Cole watched them gather. He did not move against them. When the Threll commander, who had set down her stud in her fleet but not, it turned out, her instinct for a flanking move, leaned in to ask why the human let the conspiracy form, I happened to be near enough to hear his answer, and I have kept it. Let them write it, Cole said. A new charter needs a network to run on, and there's only one network in this building, and I've got it. They can found 100 assemblies on that sideboard this morning. Every one of them will reach for the relays to convene, and every one of them will find the relays answer me. I don't have to stop them from organizing. I only have to own the thing all organizing needs. He folded his hands. That's the lesson your bloc never learned about my species, Commander. We don't fight the army. We buy the road the army marches on, and then we let the army discover it has nowhere to go. The emergency charter died exactly the way he said it would. The conspirators finished their draft and rose to convene their new body and reached for the relays to summon the loyal fleets to it. And the relays answered, in League ceremonial cadence with the central command seal, that there was no quorum, that the fleets were under standing orders to hold, that the matter of the human was unresolved, signed with the live key, the key the human held. The dozen conspirators stood at the heavy benches with a new charter in their hands, and not one channel in the galaxy that would carry it, and one by one they sat back down, and the second assembly dissolved before it had ever convened, and no one outside that chamber ever knew it had existed at all. The heavy second fleet, the one that went dark rather than amber, the one Cole had said resisted, was the only true battle of that morning, and the chamber did not see it, because the chamber saw nothing that happened in the dark beyond the dome. But Drail's board saw the shape of it, and Drail read the shape of it aloud, and so I had it, and I will give it here because the Second Fleet's 10,000 dead are owed at least a accounting. When the turning hand reached the Second Fleet's command nodes, the Second did not surrender, because the Second's admiral was a creature named Korth, and Korth had built his career on the principle that a fleet which is never lost does not learn how, and so cannot. He had heard, somewhere down a still-living channel, that the other fleets were standing down, and he had concluded, not wrongly, by the logic of a body that had never been beaten, that the stand-downs were treason, that the bloc was being unmade from within by cowards, and that the Second Fleet's duty was to burn for Earth as ordered, and let the cowards answer for the rest. He cut his fleet off from the turn network entirely, every node going dark on purpose, dark to the human hand and dark to the assembly both, and he ordered the Second to make its own way to Earth on stored coordinates and old discipline, the way fleets had crossed the dark before there were relays at all. It was, by every standard the Star League had ever taught, the right decision. It was the decision the wall full of names had been won by. And it was the decision that killed his fleet, because a fleet that cuts itself off from the network to escape the hand on the network is a fleet that has volunteered to fight without sensors, without coordination, without warning, against an enemy that has spent 6 years learning exactly the route stored coordinates and old discipline would choose. The Second Fleet burned for Earth in the dark, alone, deaf, and proud, and somewhere out past the failed nodes it met whatever Earth had waiting on that route, and Drail's board recorded the Second going from 10,000 contacts to silence over the course of 4 minutes, and then there was nothing on the board where the Second Fleet had been. Cole knew it was happening before Drail finished reading it. I watched him know it. He had the look of a man hearing a thing he had planned for, hoped against, and not been able to prevent, because you cannot save a fleet that has chosen to go where it cannot be reached, and the only mercy you have for it is to make sure it is the only one. He thought going dark would hide him from me, Cole said very low, when Drail's board fell silent. It hid him from his own people instead. That's the trap of it. The network I owned was the only thing that could have warned him off the route. The moment he cut himself loose to escape me, he cut himself loose from the one voice that could have told him to turn around. He closed his eyes briefly, the only time I saw him do it. Note the Second Fleet, in your record. Note that they weren't cowards and they weren't fools. They were brave in exactly the way that gets a fleet killed against us. Brave at the wrong thing. The wall taught them that bravery. The wall killed them with it. Make sure that's written down. Somebody should be sorry for the Second who isn't me, because I can't afford to be, and they're owed it. He was an old creature, Speaker of the Assembly for 30 years, and he had not held that ring for 30 years by being slow. He silenced the chamber with the gesture of binding authority. Both upper limbs crossed above his crest, and the drone fell off into a ragged quiet. And into that quiet he turned and looked directly at Edrin Cole for the first time since the session began. "What have you done?" he said. It was not quite a question. The chamber relay carried it. My glyphs carried it. The words went out into 40 registers and came back as silence. I gave it to Cole. Cole looked up from his slate. He did not stand. He met the speaker's eyes across the speaking ring, across 400 years of carved campaign glyphs, across the bodies of 31 worlds that had said no. "Nothing yet," he said. I translated it, and the chamber flinched at the word yet the way a body flinches from a blade it has only just felt enter. "Speaker," Cole went on, still seated, "still even I want to be careful that you understand what's happening, because you'll have to explain it to whatever's left of this assembly afterward, and you should get it right." He set one hand flat on the slate. "You voted to declare war on my world. You read it twice. You told me it was final and could not be withdrawn. I asked you, and you told me in front of all of them." He tipped his head toward the tears. I noted the time. "You have taken our fleets," Vorain said. His voice had gone thin. "I haven't taken anything," Cole said. "Your fleets have stood down. There's a difference. And the difference is the only mercy on the table. So I'd attend to it. They stood down because the order to fight Earth went out over systems that have answered Earth for some time now. You declared a war this morning. The war was already decided. I came to note when you'd find out. I have translated declarations and pleas and threats and surrenders, and I have never had a harder time keeping my voice level than I did rendering that, because it was not a boast. A boast wants to be believed. Cole did not need to be believed. He was reading the chamber at the time. "The Second Fleet," the Kasuri delegate said into the quiet, his 4 eyes on the dark point at the edge of the ring. "The Second has not stood down. It has not gone amber. It has gone dark." "The Second resisted," Cole said, "before I had even turned to him. as though he had been waiting for that one. He said it without satisfaction and without apology, the flattest words I rendered all day. It was given the same terms as the others. It declined them. Tell the speaker I'm sorry about the second. Not sorry enough to have done otherwise. But sorry, I told the speaker. Vorhane did not answer. He was looking at the dark point where 10,000 of his own had been, an hour ago, the heavy element of a block that had never lost, and I think it was the dark point and not the amber ones that finally told him the truth, because amber is a fleet you might argue back, and dark is a fact you bury. It was after the warden sat down that Vorhane made his real attempt, not at force, which he had seen fail, but at the thing his kind were genuinely good at, the thing the Star League had used for 400 years between its wars. He tried to negotiate. He rose again, and he had recovered something of his bearing, and when he spoke it was in the warm, reasonable register the Assembly used when it wanted a thing without taking it. Human, he said. Edrin Cole, let us speak plainly, as leaders. You have made your point, and it is a point well made. The Assembly will not soon forget the lesson of this morning. But a lesson is not a war, and a war is not a conquest. You hold our fleets. Very well, Earth has earned a seat, a real seat, a voting seat, not the observer's chair. Name your fleet's share of the block. Name your world's representation. We are reasonable creatures. There is room at this table for a strong newcomer, and a strong newcomer is wise to take the room it is offered rather than break the table it might have sat at. It was, I will say, a good offer. It was the offer a wise conqueror would have taken. A seat at the head of the very block that had voted to destroy you, the conquest legitimized, the table kept whole. I translated it carefully, and I watched Cole listen to it, and I confess I did not know what he would say, because it was the kind of offer that has ended 1,000 wars in the favor of the one who held the cards. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he stood. The first time he had stood since the session began, and he buttoned the top button of his coat, and he looked at Vorhane across the ring with something that was not contempt exactly, but was close enough to it that I had to choose my register with care. Speaker, he said, I'm not going to sit at your table. The chamber went still. You've built a fine table, Cole went on. 400 years, 31 names on the wall. And every name on that wall is a people who once sat where you're inviting me to sit, who took the seat instead of breaking the table, who told themselves the block would be different with them in it. It never was. The table doesn't change because a strong newcomer joins it. The newcomer changes. That's what the table is for. He paused, and his voice came down, level and final. Earth declined your seat the day you sent your first survey through our space and decided we were an asset to be studied. We've spent 6 years learning your table well enough to take it apart. We're not going to sit at it now. Then what? Vorhane said. And the warmth was gone, and what was left was the bare voice of an old creature at the end of his arts. What do you want, if not the table? I want the table gone, Cole said. Not Earth at the head of it. Gone. The Star League dissolved, the charter struck, the 11 fleets returned to 11 peoples to keep or scrap as they choose, and the 31 names on that wall given back the right to govern themselves that this room voted away from them. He looked up at the lit charter, the 31 glyphs burning. That's the whole of it, Speaker. I didn't come to be the next thing on your wall. I came to take the wall down. I have rendered a great many sentences in my life, and I do not believe I have ever rendered one that changed a room the way that one did. The chamber had been braced for a conqueror. A conqueror it could understand. A conqueror wanted what the Assembly wanted, only more of it, and the whole long history of the block was the history of conquerors trading the table back and forth. What the chamber could not understand, what it had no category for, was a victor who did not want the prize. A man who held 11 fleets and the planetary grid and the chamber's own armory, and who had used all of it to ask that the thing he had captured be dismantled and given away. The 31 campaign glyphs burned along the charter, and I watched the delegates of the Star League look at those names, really look at them, perhaps for the first time in their careers, and begin, here and there across the tiers, to understand that they were not the room's proudest history. They were the room's indictment. They had spent 400 years reading the wall as a record of victories, and a human had just read it back to them as a list of the dead, and once you have heard it read that way, you cannot unhear it. The Pell delegate spoke first into the silence, and his thin, quick voice had gone careful. If the block is dissolved, he said, the small fleets, the Avian, the Pell, the worlds the charter swallowed, we would be returned to ourselves. You would, Cole said. And the large fleets, the Pell said, glancing at the Threll, at the Asen, at the heavy benches that had run the block for 4 centuries. They would lose the charter that made them lords of the small. They would, Cole said, and there it was, the line under the chamber, the line that had always been there, the line between the fleets that owned the Star League and the fleets the Star League owned, surfacing at last in the open air. The Pell delegate sat slowly. Across the floor I saw Senna of the Avian lift her head, and I understood that Cole had not divided the assembly with that offer. He had simply held up a mirror, and the assembly had divided itself along the seam it had carried, hidden, for 400 years. The proud benches saw their lordship ending. The small benches saw a door, and the human stood at the rail with his coat buttoned and let them look at the seam and said nothing more, because he had learned the thing the niche of his whole profession was built on, the thing I had watched him do all morning, that a man who has set the truth on the table does not need to argue it. He only needs to be quiet while the room reads it. There was a silence after Cole said he would take the wall down, a long one, the chamber turning the idea over and finding no handle on it. And into that silence the oldest delegate in the assembly spoke, a creature so ancient that I had never heard its voice in 6 years, seated at the high bench reserved for the founding fleets. It rose slowly, and the chamber gave it the quiet of deep respect, because whatever was about to be unmade, this was a thing that had helped make it. I sat at the writing of the charter, the old delegate said. 400 years ago, I was young as my people counted. We told ourselves we were binding 11 fleets so that no single one could tyrannize the others. We believed it. I believed it. It looked up at the lit campaign glyphs, the 31 names burning along the wall it had helped raise. I have watched, across 4 centuries, the charter we wrote to prevent tyranny become the instrument of it. Every name on that wall was added by a vote I helped make lawful. I told myself, each time, that this one was necessary, that the block was safer for it, that the next would be the last. There was always a reason. There is always a reason. It turned with great effort toward the human at the rail. I do not know if you are right to take it down. I am too old and too implicated to judge. But I know that no one inside this room could ever have taken it down because every one of us, given the network you hold, would have used it to add a 32nd name. You did not. I have lived 400 years, and I have never once seen a creature hold that much power for a morning and choose to hold less by evening. It lowered itself back to its bench. Strike the charter, Speaker. I withdraw my fleet and my vote and 400 years of my consent. Let it end with someone in the room who remembers writing it. I translated it, and it cost me something to keep my voice level, because it was the only confession spoken in that chamber all day. And a confession 4 centuries old is a heavy thing to carry across a gap between species. Cole listened to all of it. When the old delegate finished, he inclined his head, the deep version, the one I had only seen him give the kasuri. And he said quietly, the only soft thing he said to any delegate the whole morning, thank you. That was braver than anything my people did today. We only built the lever. You're the one who has to live having written the wall. He paused. For what it's worth, I think you wrote it believing it. I think most walls get written by someone who believed it. That's what makes them so hard to take down, and why someone has to. The Thrall commander made the last serious attempt. I will give her that. While the chamber drowned in its own noise, she had been working, head down, at the auxiliary board, and she came up out of it with the hard clarity of a soldier who has found the one move left on a losing board. The home defense grid, she said, and the chamber turned to her. The fleets are gone, accept it. But the assembly does not sit in the open. We sit beneath the planetary grid of the League capital, 400 years of layered defense, the densest envelope of force in this arm of the galaxy. Whatever the human has done to our ships at the edge, he has not touched the grid over our heads. Speaker, raise it. Raise the grid and seal the capital and let him sit here with his clock while we negotiate from behind a wall he cannot breach. It was, I thought, the right move. It was the move I would have made. Vorhain seized on it with the energy of a drowning creature finding a spar, and he gave the order, and the deputy keyed the command that would bring 4 centuries of overlapping defenses screaming up into the sky above us, the wall that had never been raised in earnest, because nothing in 400 years had ever come close enough to merit it. Nothing happened. The deputy keyed it again. He keyed the manual override. He keyed the Charter Authority emergency raise, the one that required the speaker's own bioseal. And Vorhain pressed his seal to the board with a limb that had begun very slightly to shake. The grid did not rise. It will not accept the command, the deputy whispered. It is reporting, Speaker. It is reporting that it is already under tasking. It says it is engaged. It says it has standing orders. From whom, Vorhain said, and it came out of him as barely a sound at all. The deputy did not have to answer. The status ring above the floor, which had shown 11 fleets and now showed 10 amber and 1 dark, changed a final time. The carved campaign glyphs along the charter were lit from within, all 31 of them, the 31 worlds that had said no, and over them, threaded through the planetary grid the assembly had trusted above its own ships. A new set of markers bloomed and held, steady white, the white of a force under command, not Earth's fleets. The assembly's own grid, the 400-year wall, turned outward to face the chamber it had been built to protect, every emplacement of it now answering a hand that had been resting on the controls long enough to make them its own. Cole looked up at the lit charter. He looked at it the way a man looks at a thing he has read about and is seeing, for the first time, with a kind of grim respect for the size of what someone before him had built and what it had taken to undo it quietly. They were proud of those, he said, the 31 names. I'll give them that. They earned everyone. He pressed the light on his slate, and the chronometer stopped, and he turned the dark glass face toward me so I could see the figures, though only I in that whole chamber could read them. Local noon, he said. Tell the speaker his war is over. Tell him it ended 4 minutes before he learned it had begun. The grid is the part the histories get most wrong, so let me be exact about it. Because I was 3 meters from the only man in the chamber who knew what it meant. When Drayle reported that the planetary defense grid had refused the speaker's bioseal and declared itself already under tasking, the chamber's last hope died, but it did not die loudly. It died the way the rest of it had died, as a fact stated in a level voice absorbed, and then understood a beat too late. The grid was 400 years of layered defense. It was the densest envelope of force in the arm. It was the wall the assembly had built so that no fleet, no matter how large, could ever reach the chamber where the bloc made its decisions. And it had been turned, like everything else, by the patient hand that had been resting on the controls long enough to make them its own. But the grid was not turned the way the fleets were turned. The fleets had been turned outward into surrender. The grid had been turned inward. It is tracking targets, Drayle said, reading his board, and now for the first time, his level voice had something underneath it. The grid emplacements are slewed. They are tracking. The targets are speaker, the targets are us. The grid is tracking this chamber. The Threll commander came half out of her seat. The Asen made a sound I had no glyph for, and Vorhain looked down at Cole with an expression I had not seen on him, the bare animal question of a creature that has just learned the wall it built to keep death out has been turned to point death in. Cole shook his head, once. It's not going to fire, he said. Tell them. The grid is tracking the chamber because I needed you to understand. All at once and past arguing that the most defended room in League space has been under my gun since before you opened the session this morning. I needed you to feel it the way you'd have made my world feel it by tonight. I'm not going to fire. I was never going to fire. The difference between me and the resolution you passed this morning is that I can do the thing and choose not to, and you couldn't have, and that's the whole of why this ended by noon and not in a year of war. He let the slate go dark in his hand. The guns will stand down when I walk out of this chamber. You have my word. And my word is worth exactly as much as the fact that you're all still breathing to doubt it. I rendered it. I watched 900 delegates understand that they had spent the morning alive entirely at the discretion of the man at the rail and had not known it, and that he had spent the morning making certain they would survive to know it. There is a kind of power that wants you dead. There is a rarer kind that wants you to live with what you almost did. The Star League had never met the second kind. It met it that morning, and it had no charter for it, and no glyph, and no name. There was a moment near the very end, before the vote, that I have kept apart from the rest, because it is the one I take out and look at when I want to remember what kind of man I followed out of that chamber. The Asen delegate, the one who had sent the wardens, who had hunted a neck all morning, made one last move, and it was the smallest and the cruelest of the day. He could not reach the human. He could not reach the fleets. So he reached for the only thing left in the room that the humans seemed to care about, and he pointed one limb at me, at the translator's bench, and he said to the chamber that the human's voice in our tongue had been a human agent all along, a planted thing, 6 years a spy at the heart of the assembly's own speech, and that I should be held against the human's good behavior as the one human asset. Chamber could still put a hand on. It was a lie. I had served the assembly faithfully for 6 years. I had carried their war resolution into a human ear without softening one word of it. But it was the kind of lie that does not need to be true to be dangerous. And the wardens at the doors, dead lances or not, were still League wardens, and the Asen was still a delegate of a heavy fleet. And for one cold instant the chamber's sphere looked for somewhere to land and found my bench. Cole did not raise his voice. He did not turn the grid, or kill the lights, or do any of the large things he had spent the morning proving he could do. He simply stood, and he stepped between the Asen's pointing limb and my bench, an unhurried gray man putting his body in a doorway, and he said one flat sentence that I had to translate while standing behind it. This one is mine, he said, not Earth's, mine. He carried your war resolution honestly when honesty cost him everything, and he'll carry whatever you say next the same way. And if a single warden in this chamber takes a step toward him, the last thing the Star League ever learns is what I turn off after the air handlers. Sit down. The Austin sat down. I have translated declarations of love and declarations of war, the proudest sentences and the most desperate, and I do not think I have ever stood behind a sentence that did to me what that one did, because it was not large, and it was not for the record, and it was not the kind of thing a victor says when 900 enemies are watching. It was a man claiming a working creature the rest of the room had decided was furniture. This one is mine. I have been many bodies' voice since, but I have only ever been one man's, and he named me his in front of the Star League Assembly with the grid tracking the room, and I have never once regretted the door I walked out of after him. Vorhain called the vote. It was the last act of the Speaker of the Star League Assembly, and I think he knew it. And I think he chose to do it precisely because he knew it, because there are old creatures who, given the choice between dying as a tyrant and ending as a clerk, will choose the clerk's death, and Vorhain in his last hour chose it. There is a motion before the assembly, he said, and his voice had aged a decade since dawn. Complicit in the humans' terms. The dissolution of the Star League, the striking of the charter, the return of the 11 fleets to their peoples, and the restoration of self-governance to the worlds named upon this wall. He paused. I will not pretend the assembly is voting freely. We are voting under the guns of a grid we built and no longer hold. But I have been speaker 30 years, and I have presided over 31 declarations of war from this ring, and I find I would rather the last vote I call be one that the worlds on that wall would have wished us to call 400 years ago. The motion is before you. The assembly will vote. They voted. I will not give you the count fleet by fleet, because the count is not the point. The point is that they voted. This body that had voted 31 times to break a world, voting once to unmake itself. The small fleets carried it first. The Avian, the Pell, the swallowed worlds, Senna's hand among the first to rise. The proud benches held out longest, the Threll and the Austin, until even they understood that there was nothing left to be proud lord of, and a lordship over a dissolved block is no lordship at all. The motion carried. The Star League Assembly, in the 400th year of its charter, voted by a margin wide enough that it was not worth the counting to dissolve the Star League Assembly. Drayle, the level-voiced deputy, read the result into the chamber relay, and the relay carried it, because someone had decided this was a message that should go out, and across League space on every channel that had been dark all morning, the relays came back to life at once, so that the 11 fleets and the 31 worlds and the whole long apparatus of the block heard, in the same instant, that the body which had ruled them was no more. Cole listened to the result through me. He did not celebrate it. He nodded the way he had nodded at the very beginning. When I confirmed the appointment, he already knew he had. Good, he said. Note the time. I noted it. It was 11 minutes before local noon. The years after are not a story the way the morning was a story, but I will set down a little of them, because the morning is the part people want and the years are the part that matters, and a record that gives only the first does a kind of lie. The Star League did not become an empire under Earth. That is the thing the galaxy expected, and the thing that did not happen, and the not happening of it is the only reason any of the rest of it was worth doing. There was no human governor installed at the ring. There was no tribute, no garrison, no human admiral set over the surrendered fleets. Within a season, the 11 fleets had been returned to the 11 peoples, exactly as Cole had said at the rail, and most of those peoples promptly began to scrap or sell or quietly hoard the warships the block had made them build, because a fishing people like the Avian has little use for a war fleet once nothing is forcing it to keep one. The 31 worlds on the wall got their governance back. Not all of them survived the getting of it. 400 years is long enough to forget how to rule yourself, and some of those worlds tore themselves apart relearning it, and Earth, to its credit and against a great deal of pressure, did not step in to spare them the tearing. A self-governance you're given by a stronger hand isn't self-governance, Cole had said. In another chamber, in another year. It's just a new hand. They have to do it badly themselves before they can do it well themselves. We did. Everyone does. I translated that too. I've translated for him for many years now. I followed him out of the Star League, and I never went back to being anyone else's voice. Vorhain did not live to see the dissolution finished. He stepped down the day after he called the vote, an old creature who had presided over the end of the thing he had spent his life serving, and he died within the year, and the histories of his own people are still arguing whether he was the block's last tyrant or its first honest man. I think he was both, in the same morning, and I think the morning was the only one in his long life that he was ever fully awake for. I do not mourn him, but I do not spit on his name either. He called the last vote. Not every tyrant gets the chance, and fewer take it. Senna of the Avian lives still. She is old now, older than I will be, and she sits at the head of her small fishing people, and once a year she sends word to Earth's representatives, a short formal message in the Avian cadence, marking the date of the dissolution. I have translated every one of them. They say the same thing each year, more or less. That the avian remember who was right in the room while everyone else was right afterward, and that they keep the date. Cole was correct about her. People needed her name. I gave it to them, and they kept it. And that is the only monument from that morning I have ever felt clean about helping to build. Drayle, the level-voiced deputy, did become useful after, exactly as Cole had said. When the Dissolution Commission convened to do the long, unglamorous work of unwinding a 400-year block, the disputed shipyards, the swallowed treasuries, the worlds that could not agree where their borders had been before the charter ate them, it was Drayle who served as its first registrar, the one honest hand both the proud fleets and the small ones could bear to be counted by. I translated for that commission for 3 years. It was nothing like the morning. It was ledgers and grievances and old maps and creatures shouting across tables about debts 4 centuries stale, and there were days I would have traded the whole tedious piece for 1 more hour of the clean, terrible clarity of the chamber. But Cole, who chaired none of it and attended all of it from the back of the room, told me once that the ledgers were the real war and the morning had only been the declaration. Anyone can win the room, he said. The room is easy. You own the network and you keep your voice down and the room falls over by noon. What's hard is the ledger. The ledger is where you find out whether you took the block apart to free the worlds on the wall or just to put your own name on the wall instead. Most victors lose that war. They win the room and they tell themselves the ledger can wait, and by the time they look up, there's a new block with their flag on it and a new set of small fleets learning to keep their voices down. He watched a Pell registrar and an Asan registrar argue over a border across the commission table. This arguing, this dull, ugly arguing where nobody has a fleet and everybody has a grievance and it takes 9 years and pleases no one, this is what winning looks like if you did it for the right reason. If it ever stops being tedious, we did it wrong. I have thought about that more than almost anything else he ever said. The morning is the part the galaxy remembers, the 11 fleets, the dead relays, the war that was over by noon. The 9 years of ledgers are the part nobody made a song about, and they are the part that meant the 31 names on the wall became 31 worlds again, instead of 31 new entries on a human wall. Cole was right that it never stopped being tedious. I took that as proof we had not become the thing we unmade. It is the only proof of such a thing that I have ever fully trusted, because it is the only kind that cannot be faked. A victor too bored by his own dominion to enjoy it is a victor who never wanted dominion in the first place. I translated it. I have wondered since whether I should have softened it, whether a translator's whole duty is sometimes to carry the meaning and not the wound. But Cole had hired me 6 years before with a single instruction, and it had never changed. Carry it exactly. So I carried it exactly. And I watched Speaker Vorhein of the Star League Assembly understand, fully and at last, that he had spent the morning declaring a war that had been concluded before he opened the session. He sat down. It was not a collapse. It was the careful, deliberate sitting of an old creature who has decided that standing serves no further purpose. The chamber around him had stopped its noise. There is a silence that comes after the drone. When a body of 900 has exhausted every question and arrived together at the single answer, and it filled the chamber now, total and cool, broken only by the small click of the slate as Cole closed its lid. Then Cole did the thing I had been waiting 6 years to see a human do in that room, though I had not known I was waiting for it. He stood. He buttoned his coat. He picked up the black case and tucked it under his arm. And he turned not to the speaker, not to the tears, but to me, the translator, the one piece of furniture in that chamber the assembly had never once thought worth noticing. And he inclined his head a fraction, the courtesy of one working man to another at the close of a long shift. Tell them whatever they ask, he said. I'm finished here. And he walked out, up the long aisle between the tiers of the Star League Assembly, past the carved names of 31 dead worlds, past 900 delegates of the bloc that had never lost a war and had just lost the only one that would ever matter, and not one of them moved to stop him, because there was nothing left in that chamber strong enough to stop a single unhurried man in a buttoned coat. The great doors opened for him. Daylight came in, and then he was gone, and the doors closed, and the Star League Assembly was left to itself and the amber lights. They did ask afterward. They asked me for hours. They asked how long the human systems had been inside theirs, and I said I did not know, and that was true. They asked whether the surrender terms would hold, and I said that was not a translator's question. They asked finally, the question I think they had wanted to ask from the first minute, the Threll commander putting it to me with her crest, gone gray and flat. They asked why Earth had not simply told them, why 6 years of silence, why let the assembly walk into a vote it had already lost, instead of warning them off it. I thought about Cole's folded hands on the rail and the case he had not opened until the vote was final, and the time he had asked to note. You would not have believed a warning, I said. You had never lost. A warning is a thing you give to an enemy you respect. He did not come to warn you. He came to let you decide, in front of all of them, with the vote final and on the record, so that no one could ever say it was done to you and not by you. The commander was quiet a long time. And the noon, she said at last. The clock. Why the clock? Because he wanted you to know the exact hour, I said. That the Star League stopped being something the galaxy was afraid of. He thought you'd earned at least that, the exact hour. I gathered my glyphs and my bench in the small case of my profession, and I went up the long aisle myself the way he had gone, and the doors opened for me too into the same daylight. I have translated in many chambers since for many bodies, and I have learned to hear the sound a room makes when it believes it has already won. It is a sound like wind through a field. I never hear it now without thinking of a gray, unhurried man with his hands folded on a rail, waiting for a train, noting the time.